At first, it seemed like just another busy day at the hotel reception. But when a disabled guest quietly rolling through the lobby was turned away by a rude receptionist, the situation quickly escalated. What seemed like an ordinary encounter soon sparked a series of events that would force everyone involved to confront their own assumptions and prejudices. Would the receptionist's careless actions haunt her? Would the guest's quiet dignity bring justice in unexpected ways? This story will leave you questioning how often we overlook the kindness we owe others, only to regret it when it's too late. The morning sun had just begun to filter through the tall windows of the lobby, casting a soft, golden light on the polished floors of the Grandview Hotel. It was the kind of luxurious establishment where the rich and powerful often made their temporary homes while they conducted business in the city. A smooth marble counter ran the length of the room, adorned with fresh flower arrangements and a scattering of high-end brochures, promoting exclusive events and nearby attractions. The hotel was a hub of activity, with bellhops rushing by, guests sipping on coffee at a corner cafe, and the hum of business deals taking place. Behind the counter, Caroline sat, her gaze fixed on the computer screen, her fingers typing away with practiced efficiency. At 25, she had already secured a solid position at the hotel, which she viewed as just a stepping stone to greater things. She was ambitious, sharp, and proud of the image she had cultivated. To her, working at the Grandview represented the ideal of success, the kind of job she'd imagined for herself when she first left her small hometown with dreams of a glamorous life. Yet this polished exterior was merely that, an exterior. Beneath it, Caroline harbored impatience, often disdaining the repetitive tasks and dealing with guests she considered difficult or out of place in her world of luxury. And then there was Emily. Emily had been planning her trip to the Grandview for months. A successful writer in her 40s, she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 5 years earlier, a condition that limited her mobility but had not dulled her love for life. She had worked hard, built a successful career from scratch, and fought tirelessly to prove that her disability didn't define her. This particular weekend was special. Emily had been invited to speak at a writing conference in the city and decided to book a few nights at the Grandview for a bit of rest and relaxation before the event. She dreamed of a peaceful stay where she could bask in the comfort of a luxurious hotel, even if she couldn't fully enjoy all that it offered. With her walker in hand, Emily slowly made her way across the lobby, her movements deliberate but graceful. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and she wore a soft blue dress that complemented the calmness of her demeanor. The reception desk with its gleaming marble surface loomed ahead of her, and she prepared herself for the usual questions about her needs. Although she had grown accustomed to the stares and whispers, she had always hoped that this time would be different, that this time people would treat her as just another guest, as someone deserving of the same respect and care as anyone else. Caroline's eyes flicked up from her screen as she heard the soft clink of the wheels against the marble floor. She was about to offer the usual smile she gave every guest, but when her eyes met Emily's, there was something in the way the disabled woman moved, something that set her teeth on edge. Caroline had never understood why people in wheelchairs or with walkers insisted on making themselves the center of attention. It was an inconvenience, really, and she often wondered why people with disabilities didn't just stay home instead of taking up space in hotels designed for people who didn't need the extra accommodations. Still, she forced a smile and prepared to greet Emily. But the way she was standing there, her posture slightly stiff, her gaze steady, but not demanding, made Caroline's temper flare just a little more than usual. "Hello, how can I help you today?" Caroline's tone was more curt than she intended, her eyes already moving to the computer screen, barely making contact with Emily. Emily hesitated for just a moment before replying. "I've reserved a room, under 𝐬𝐿_Jacobs," she said softly, yet with quiet confidence, her voice steady despite the edge of discomfort she felt in this kind of situation. Caroline quickly typed the name into the system, eyes flicking back and forth between her screen and Emily's face. She muttered under her breath, scrolling through the system. "It looks like we don't have a room ready for you yet." The words barely registered at first, but Emily's heart sank when Caroline continued with an almost casual indifference. "You see, we have a very specific policy regarding accessibility. The rooms designed for guests with disabilities are in high demand, and unfortunately, we have no available rooms for you at this time. Emily's brows furrowed, her hand gripping her walker tighter. "I'm sure there's been a mistake," she said, her voice composed but firm. "I made the reservation well in advance and confirmed my needs. I'm sure your hotel can accommodate me." But Caroline didn't look up from the screen. "We do our best, but sometimes—" Her words trailed off, as if the matter was already settled in her mind. "Maybe you should try one of the smaller hotels. They tend to cater more to, well, people like you." A silence hung in the air for a moment. Emily's gaze hardened, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. What had been a simple check-in had suddenly become something more, a moment of cruelty veiled in professional indifference. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her walker tighter. The words that had just left Caroline's lips were an affront to everything she had worked for, everything she believed in. The ache in her chest deepened, not because of the physical toll her condition took on her, but because of the sheer weight of the hurt. Her entire life had been a series of battles, fighting to maintain independence, to be seen as an equal, to navigate a world that seemed to continually underestimate her. And now here she was, in a luxurious hotel lobby, told that her very presence was an inconvenience. For a moment she considered leaving. The thought of walking out, back into the world she had come to know, one that could be harsh, unwelcoming, and unyielding, seemed almost like the easier option. But that wasn't who Emily was. She had faced too many obstacles, too many barriers to just let this one go. She had a right to be here just as much as anyone else, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her. She took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on Caroline, who was now tapping her fingers on the counter with an air of finality. Emily's voice was calm, but the underlying firmness was undeniable. "I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I made this reservation because I believe this hotel could provide the accommodations I need. If there's a problem with my room, I'd like to speak to your manager." Caroline finally looked up from her screen, the barest hint of frustration in her eyes. "I told you, the rooms are all booked. You can try calling customer service, but I'm really not sure there's much that can be done right now." Emily's breath hitched in her throat, a surge of emotion washing over her. She could feel the tears welling up, but she fought them back with all her might. "You don't seem to understand," she said again, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I don't need a special room. I just need to be treated like everyone else. I'm a guest here, just like any other. I've paid for this stay, and I expect to be treated with respect." For a moment, Caroline's expression faltered, as if Emily's words had struck a chord. But then she quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Like I said, there's nothing I can do. Maybe you should try a more accessible hotel." That was the breaking point. Emily had spent years fighting to prove her worth, to show the world that she was capable, that her disability didn't make her any less than anyone else. And now here was Caroline, treating her as if she were a burden to be shuffled aside. As Emily turned, the weight of her frustration, sadness, and anger swirled within her. She could feel her heart racing as she made her way back toward the lobby's exit, determined not to let the tears fall in front of anyone. But the moment she reached the door, something strange happened, something that would set in motion the events that would change everything. Caroline didn't expect what happened next. As she turned to prepare for the next guest, she heard a voice, soft but clear, coming from the side. "Excuse me, miss?" Caroline froze. She hadn't seen the man approach, but there he stood, a tall, well-dressed figure in his early 50s, wearing a tailored suit that suggested wealth and influence. His face was serious, but not unkind. He was standing near the door Emily had just walked through, watching Caroline with an intensity that made her feel suddenly uncomfortable. "Yes?" Caroline said, her voice clipped, masking her sudden unease. "Could you tell me what just happened?" the man asked, his voice steady, but tinged with concern. "I saw the way you treated that woman. She's clearly upset. What did she say to you?" Caroline's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she considered brushing the man off. He was a guest after all, and what business was it of his? But something about his presence, his air of authority, made her hesitate. She quickly composed herself, a forced smile appearing on her lips. She was upset about her reservation. There's not much I could do. Our rooms for disabled guests are all booked. The man's brow furrowed. I see. And did you check to see if she actually had a reservation? Caroline hesitated. She didn't seem to have one that matched, and it wasn't my job to question the system. It's all in the computer. The man's gaze never wavered. I understand that, but I think there's more to it than that. You made an assumption. Do you often treat your guests this way, assuming that they can't afford or don't deserve the same treatment? The words hit Caroline like a ton of bricks. She had never thought about it in those terms, never considered how her actions might be perceived by others, especially guests who didn't fit the usual mold. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She had no excuse. The man sighed, his expression softening. I've been in the hospitality industry for decades. Let me give you some advice. It's not about whether someone needs special accommodations. It's about how you make them feel. Every guest deserves respect, and every guest has the right to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are or what challenges they face. Caroline swallowed hard. She had never really considered it that way before. She had always been so focused on the task at hand, the efficiency of the job, that she had never thought about the human element, the kindness and care that was supposed to come with it. The man's gaze softened. You're lucky, you know, he said, a quiet chuckle escaping him. You've just learned one of the most important lessons of hospitality, empathy. Before Caroline could say anything else, the man walked away, heading out the door in the same direction Emily had gone. Caroline stood there, stunned, her mind reeling. She hadn't realized how much she had taken her position for granted, how much she had overlooked the simple human side of her work. And as she stood there, staring at the spot where the man had just been, she felt a wave of shame wash over her. Outside, Emily had already reached the parking lot, feeling the bitter sting of rejection. She was about to unlock her car door when she heard someone calling her name. Excuse me, miss, wait! Emily turned, startled, and saw the same man from the lobby walking quickly toward her. It was the same man who had spoken to Caroline, his expression earnest and concerned. Are you all right? He asked gently, his voice warm. I couldn't help but notice what happened back there. That was completely unfair. Emily smiled weakly, her pride still intact, but the hurt from the interaction lingering. I'll be fine. It's just, sometimes you think you've come a long way, but then something like that happens, and it feels like a punch in the gut. The man nodded, his eyes understanding. I can't undo what happened, but I'd like to make it right. I'm the hotel's owner, and I'd like to offer you a complimentary stay. No special accommodations, just the same treatment as anyone else. Emily blinked, taken aback by his words. She hadn't expected that. Are you sure? She asked, her voice almost trembling. The man nodded. Absolutely. No one should be made to feel less than anyone else. I'm sorry you were treated that way. If you'll let me, I'd like to show you that we value all our guests. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of validation she hadn't realized she was missing. She smiled, a genuine smile, something she hadn't done in a while. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. The man smiled back, and for the first time that day, Emily felt seen. Not for her disability, but for the person she truly was. Caroline, standing by the window, watched as the scene unfolded. She saw Emily's face soften as the man spoke to her, saw the genuine gratitude in her eyes. And in that moment, Caroline realized just how wrong she had been, how the world she had built in her mind had crumbled with a single, unthinking act of dismissal. She felt the weight of her mistake, and the regret was instantaneous. The air was thick with tension, an unspoken weight hanging over the lobby of the Grandview Hotel, as Caroline stood near the reception desk, staring at the empty space where Emily had once stood. Her fingers nervously drummed against the cold surface of the counter, a sharp contrast to the warm, inviting atmosphere of the hotel that she had once felt so comfortable in. But now, every polished surface, every gleaming corner, seemed to mock her. She had failed. No, worse, she had alienated a guest in the most public way possible. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, each one pulling her in a different direction. Regret, shame, and fear wove together, a dizzying spiral of emotions that she couldn't escape. Caroline's mind kept returning to the man she had spoken to earlier, the hotel's owner. His words had struck a chord in her, much deeper than she had anticipated. Empathy. The concept seemed so simple, yet so foreign to her in that moment. She had spent years in the hospitality industry, priding herself on efficiency, speed, and perfection. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten the very essence of what it meant to be a caretaker, a provider, to make someone feel welcome. It had always been about her ambitions, her ascent, her success, but never about the people she was supposed to serve. And now, with one thoughtless action, she had driven someone away, someone who had trusted the Grandview to be a safe space, just like everyone else. The sound of the front door opening snapped Caroline out of her reverie. Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned instinctively, hoping, no, praying, that it was Emily returning to confront her, to demand some kind of retribution. Instead, it was the man again, the hotel owner. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach churn. "Caroline," he said, his voice low and serious. He didn't need to say anything else. He had already seen everything. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her face flushed with embarrassment. She felt exposed, as though every flaw in her character was laid bare for the world to see. "I made a mistake." The man didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, watching her as if weighing her every word, her every breath. His eyes softened, but there was a determination there, an underlying current of something unspoken that Caroline didn't fully understand. Finally, he spoke again. "I've been thinking about what happened, about how we treat people," he said slowly, his words deliberate. "I've been in this business long enough to know that it's easy to forget why we do it in the first place. We get caught up in the bottom line, the quotas, the rules, but in the end, it's about people, about making sure everyone feels like they belong." Caroline's throat tightened. "I know. I've always been so focused on doing things the right way, the efficient way, that I lost sight of that." The man nodded. "It happens more than you think. But this isn't just about one mistake. It's about who we choose to be when we make those mistakes. Do we own up to them? Learn from them? Or do we continue to hide behind excuses and pride?" Caroline swallowed hard, her hands shaking slightly. She wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't all her fault, that the system had let her down, that Emily had been difficult. But she knew it would be a lie. The truth was undeniable. She had failed to treat someone with kindness, and now she was faced with the consequences. I don't know what to say," she murmured. The man took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "What you do next is what matters, Caroline. You don't get to just move on from this. You need to fix it. You need to go to Emily, apologize. Show her that you understand, that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Caroline's heart raced as she processed his words. Apologize. In all her years of working in the hospitality industry, she had never once had to apologize in such a raw, vulnerable way. She had always been able to smooth things over with a polite smile, a quick fix, a surface-level solution. But this was different. This wasn't something that could be glossed over with an empty apology. This required genuine change, real humility. Before she could respond, the man turned to leave, but not without one final word. "I expect you to make this right, Caroline. The reputation of this hotel depends on it." And with that, he was gone, leaving Caroline standing there alone in the now silent lobby. She felt the weight of his words settle into her chest like a lead weight. There was no escaping this. She had to face the consequences, not just for herself, but for the people she had wronged. Emily was sitting in her car, the engine idling but not running. The world outside her window seemed to blur as her mind raced. She had gone from feeling humiliated and rejected to feeling a strange mix of confusion and disbelief when the hotel owner had approached her. She hadn't expected him to offer her a complimentary stay, certainly not after what had just transpired. It was a generous gesture, but it didn't erase the sting of Caroline's words or the feeling of being treated like a burden. She wasn't sure if she should accept the offer or walk away. After all, she had already been made to feel unwanted once. Could she trust that the hotel had truly learned from this experience? But just as she was about to make a decision, her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious. "Emily." The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Caroline's. "Caroline," Emily replied, her surprise evident. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before Caroline spoke again, her voice hesitant but sincere. I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. I know I was rude and I treated you unfairly. That wasn't right, and I'm truly sorry." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. After all, Caroline had been so dismissive before, so quick to push her away. Now the apology felt different, more real, but it also brought up all the hurt from before. I I don't know what to say," Emily replied softly, the words catching in her throat. "I don't want your apology just because you feel guilty. I want it because you truly understand what you did." "I do," Caroline said quietly. "I really do. And I want to make it right. I've been thinking about what you said, about how you just wanted to be treated like anyone else. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." Emily remained silent for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The tension between them was palpable, but there was something else there now, something like a flicker of hope. "I don't know if I can forgive you right away," Emily said finally, her voice steady, "but I do appreciate your honesty, and I'm willing to give you the chance to prove that you can change." "I will," Caroline promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I will prove it to you. Please just give me the chance." In that moment, everything changed. Caroline had taken the first step, an honest, vulnerable step toward redemption. She had made the difficult decision to confront her mistakes, to face the consequences of her actions. Emily, too, had made a choice. She wasn't going to let the past define her, but she wasn't going to accept being treated as less than anyone else. And as the two women navigated the difficult terrain of apology, forgiveness, and change, something remarkable happened. The tension that had once defined their interaction began to shift. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't easy, but it was the beginning of something real. They were both learning, growing, and realizing that the true measure of respect was in how one treated others. Not in appearances, not in assumptions, but in the simple act of empathy. As Carolyn walked out of the hotel lobby toward Emily's car, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: genuine hope and the possibility of redemption. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't have all the answers. But in that moment, she knew she was on the right path. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to walk it. And so was Emily. Weeks passed after that conversation between Caroline and Emily, and the air around the Grandview Hotel began to shift. The tension that had once hung so heavily in the lobby started to dissipate, replaced by something lighter, more open. Caroline had taken the challenge to heart, and with each passing day, she became more mindful of her interactions with guests, staff, and everyone she encountered. She wasn't perfect, not by any means, but she was trying. She was listening. One afternoon, as Caroline was working at the front desk, a familiar face entered the lobby: Emily. This time, however, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by her mother, a kind woman with a warm smile, who Caroline immediately recognized as someone who had stayed at the Grandview before, though not for many years. Emily's mother greeted Caroline with a smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Caroline, it's so nice to see you again," she said, extending her hand. "I just wanted to thank you for taking such good care of Emily." Caroline froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of learning, reflecting, and apologizing. Emily had made it clear that she wasn't ready to forgive entirely, but she had given Caroline the opportunity to prove that change was possible. Caroline had been waiting for this moment, not with expectations of forgiveness, but with the understanding that the road to redemption was long and required continual effort. "I'm glad to hear that," Caroline said, her voice steady but genuine. "It's been a journey, but I'm learning every day." Emily stood beside her mother, watching the exchange with quiet approval. She hadn't said much since their last conversation, but Caroline could sense that she was watching her, still uncertain, but willing to see if the change she promised was real. There was no immediate reconciliation, no grand gesture to wipe away the past. It was something more subtle, more grounded in everyday actions. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to return to the Grandview Hotel more often. She'd come by to check in, offer feedback, and speak with Caroline about potential improvements in the way the hotel operated. Slowly, trust began to build again. The distance that had once defined their relationship began to close, not with grand moments of forgiveness, but through the small, everyday acts of kindness and understanding. And while the hotel itself experienced a positive shift in atmosphere, Caroline's personal growth was perhaps the most significant change of all. The lesson she had learned from her mistake was not one she could simply leave behind. It became part of her. Every interaction she had with others, whether a guest or a colleague, was filtered through a new lens, one of empathy and humility. She took the time to ask about people's days, to listen when someone seemed troubled, and to show kindness even when it wasn't convenient. In doing so, Caroline created an environment at the Grandview that felt more like a community than just a business. For Emily, too, there was change. She hadn't expected to find a real transformation in Caroline, but she had learned an important lesson as well. Trust was fragile, and sometimes it was earned over time. Emily had carried a lot of hurt with her, but her willingness to give Caroline a chance to prove herself had allowed her to heal in ways she hadn't anticipated. The weight of feeling unimportant, of being dismissed, had lifted, but so too had the weight of holding on to that anger. She realized that forgiveness, not just for Caroline but for herself, had been essential for her own peace. One evening, as Emily was checking out of the Grandview, she approached Caroline at the front desk. This time her expression was different, warmer, more open. She handed Caroline a small card. "I've been thinking," Emily said softly. "I know things haven't been perfect, but I want you to know that I appreciate your efforts. You've made a difference." Caroline took the card, her heart swelling with gratitude. It wasn't a grand gesture, no forgiveness in the form of a grandiose speech. It was something simple, yet profound, an acknowledgement of change, a recognition that people could grow, that mistakes didn't define them if they were willing to learn from them. As the door closed behind Emily, Caroline stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point. She thought about the words of the hotel's owner, about how he had encouraged her to face her mistakes and make amends. She thought about how, in the beginning, she had been so determined to do things the right way, without ever considering the human side of it. But now she saw it differently. Being in the hospitality business wasn't just about offering a service. It was about creating experiences, building connections, and treating people with the respect they deserved. Later that evening, Caroline took a walk through the hotel, observing her staff as they interacted with guests. She saw the same care and attention to detail that she had been striving to embody herself. The hotel wasn't perfect, but it was better. And in that improvement, Caroline found something more valuable than just a polished reputation. She found a sense of purpose. She understood for the first time what it truly meant to serve others, not just to meet their needs, but to care for them as people. The story of Caroline and Emily serves as a powerful reminder that true change doesn't happen overnight, but through consistent effort, humility, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. In a world where we are often too quick to judge and dismiss others, it's important to remember the human side of every interaction. Each person has their struggles, their challenges, and their stories, and it's through empathy that we can build bridges, not walls. Caroline's transformation didn't come from a single apology or act of contrition. It came from her willingness to face the truth about her actions, to acknowledge the harm she had caused, and to dedicate herself to becoming better, day by day. And for Emily, the journey wasn't just about forgiving someone who had hurt her. It was about finding peace and the strength to let go of the bitterness that had weighed her down. In the end, the story of Caroline and Emily is not just about a mistake and its consequences. It's about the power of empathy, the importance of second chances, and the understanding that we are all capable of growth, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. And when we choose to take that journey, not just for ourselves, but for the people we affect along the way, we can create something truly remarkable. A world where kindness and understanding have the power to heal and transform. The Grandview Hotel wasn't just a business. It became a symbol of redemption, of the possibility of change, and of the importance of seeing others not as obstacles, but as fellow human beings deserving of respect and care. As Carolyn looked out the window at the fading sun, she smiled, knowing that she had taken the first step toward becoming the person she always hoped to be. The road ahead was still long, but she was ready to walk it. And this time, she wouldn't be walking alone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this emotional story, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts about the story.